How many here lead a social enterprise today, or you have a social enterprise associated with what you do? These are businesses set up on business principles to make a profit, but all designed to solve social problems. Social enterprise has only been born since the age of digitisation. Social enterprise has wonderful opportunities now with things like micro-volunteering. How many of you recently have done the thing on the internet where you take the squiggly text and you type it in the box to prove you're not a robot? Well, you, perhaps without knowing it, were part of the recapture program, which was devised in the United States about 15 years ago. They decided to turn analog books into digital books, one word and one letter at a time. And rather than simply getting volunteers to sit down and do a whole book at once, they said, let's open it to the globe. And so when you do that, you're actually helping to translate an analog book into a digital book, one word or one letter at a time. You are part of 100 million words every day are being translated this way, 2.5 million books every year, and you're helping with that. You as an individual citizen, through a small commitment of your effort and time, are having a huge collective impact. This is only possible because of digitisation. We have the wonderful opportunity in Africa of social enterprise generally. How many of you are familiar with M-Pesa? This is an African invention and it's remarkable in what it's doing. You know better than I do that in the rural areas of Africa generally, there are lots of people but very few banks in the rural areas. So a couple of young social entrepreneurs, and they usually are young, came up with some new school software that they could load onto old school telephones, old school mobile phones, the ones we were using 15 years ago. They began to sell these to people in the rural areas. It would allow these people to use an old school mobile phone to do transactions with their bank. Today, something like 70% of all households in Kenya have at least one M-Pesa user. What an amazing thing, all because of the power of digitisation. Now, there are some downsides to that. Big data has some wonderful benefits, as I've said, but it's also a challenge to privacy. It's a form of soft surveillance. In Europe last year, Samsung Television issued a cautionary note to all the users of its smart TVs. And it said, be careful what you say around our TVs, because our TVs, through voice recognition technology that drives the smart TV, are able to record your conversations. And we're concerned because now they're stored in the cloud, hackers, we've found, are accessing your private conversations. I think George Orwell would have loved that. Your TV is watching you, you know. I think that's amazing. This is the challenge of the big data age. We have the challenge of biohacking emerging now. There is a workstation in Sweden called Epicenter, which encourages its workers to have a chip placed in their skin. Through the chip, they can open the security doors at work, they can run the photocopier, they can even buy their lunch at the canteen. And of course, that sounds very convenient. No wallet, no cash, just a chip. But we have to think about things like biohacking. Any computerized device can, in theory, be hacked. So we must face the question, do we want our bodies in the next 10 years to become hackable and trackable devices? There's the challenge of chip theft. I can steal your money, I can steal your card without doing you violence necessarily, but I cannot steal a chip in your skin without in some way doing you an injury. There's the challenge of digital debt. You know, as we remove the substantiality of money, the weightiness of it, the feeling in your pocket when your money's running out, as we remove the substantiality of cash, we encourage people, I think, to spend without forethought, which I believe and I predict, and have said this in the West, will lead to a spike in debt over the next 10 to 15 years. There are challenges with digitisation with productivity levels too. Time starvation is a problem, even in South Africa now. Do you know that, according to recent figures, companies in South Africa lose something like 17% of payroll because of illness, and more people in your country are taking days off now through mental conditions than physical ones. And this is not surprising for me because it's part of a trend globally. 2/3 of Australian CEOs cannot switch off after work, they say, because they're too wired to the internet with work. 40% of children in the UK who own a smartphone can't sleep at night because they're too wired. Your brain needs downtime, ladies and gentlemen. It needs time to assimilate what it's learning and experiencing and to build that into long-term memory. For if it doesn't build into long-term memory, it has absolutely no benefit in producing innovation. Why? Because new ideas are always born out of connections between old ideas. And because of this lack of downtime, American business is losing an estimated 31 to 40 billion American dollars a year, depending on which study you read. There are challenges too with physical healthcare when it comes to digitisation. The UN last year published a very sobering report which said that smartphone dating apps are helping to lead to a surge in HIV infections in the Asia-Pacific region for young people aged 10 to 19 years. Why? Because they make it much easier for young people to set up casual and unprotected sexual encounters. There are challenges with digitisation with cognitive function too. Some of you that run businesses have seen this happen. Psychologists call it absent presence. You're in a board meeting. You've got your team gathered. 10 people in the room, only 6 of them are really there. Because the other 4 are engaged somewhere in cyberspace under the table. A study in Britain last year suggested that 85% of the people doing that are actually talking to someone in the room. We call this absent presence. We have the challenge of shallow think. A lot of research coming out of the United States today suggests that because we are multi-screening now, we've got lots of things going on at once and lots of different forms of data flowing in at once. Because of this, we are learning to think broad and shallow, but not narrow and deep. So we know a little bit about a lot, but not a lot about a little. And I'm saying to younger business leaders, if you want to get ahead of the curve over the next 10 to 15 years, as we approach this so-called smart age, yes, have a broad, what we call in ideas theory, adjacent possible, a broad body of ideas you can draw upon for innovation, but specialise in something, it will put you ahead of the curve. We have transactional relationships developing now with machines. Last week, my wife Davina and I celebrated 36 years of married life. She's a woman of enormous patience. 36 years of developing a transactional relationship. She's good at remembering certain things. I'm much better at remembering other things. And together, we kind of get it right now and again. That's a transactional relationship. But we do that now with machines. You don't remember what you learned on the internet anymore. You remember where you found it. You rely on the machine to remember it. You store it in Evernote. You store it in Pocket. And because it isn't built into our brains and isn't assimilated, again, it has no value in producing innovation. We have the challenge, and I think this may be a challenge in South Africa, it certainly is in Europe and in Great Britain, of what we call social disinhibition. The losing of inhibitions. Because people do online what they would never dream of doing offline. 2% of 2,000 British people last year said, I've insulted at least one person online this year that I didn't know. And 2% of 2,000 doesn't sound a lot, but if you extrapolate over the whole British population, that's 1 million people being insulted by people they don't know. Social disinhibition. Then we have the automation revolution. 15 years ago, Sony couldn't get a robot to walk. Now they run, they play football, they even greet presidents at trade exhibitions. And Sony has an entire wing of its research faculty in Japan given over to what it calls robot anthropology, the study of how robots will interact with us at every area and every level of life. The US Navy right now is debating whether robots can be taught to think morally and ethically. And you say, that's ridiculous. How can a robot be taught to think? But they're doing it now. Robots taking in huge amount of data and through big data analysis, sifting through its meaning, are able to improve on their own programming. Essentially, they are learning. In time, they will be able to teach one another. A moral code can surely be taught using this way. Whether or not they can be taught conscience, that's another matter, I think. This is having a big effect on industry. Social bots are the new wave of robotics. If you go to Japan, particularly Tokyo, and you walk into a mobile phone store, the first being, quote, unquote, that will serve you is a social bot. Same in many Japanese hotel. Social bots that are built to generically read through biometrics your facial expressions, your muscular tone, and therefore your emotions, and then respond to it in kind. These are used in Japan, and have been for about 5 years, in aged care homes. And in a survey 2 years ago, 95% of the people in the aged care homes said they preferred the robotic carer to the human variety. It's the age of the social bot, ladies and gentlemen. This is having an effect in medicine. In the US now, many hospitals use robots, bots. They don't necessarily look like, sci-fi anthropomorphized robotic figures. They're just machines. But they're dispensing medicine to people in non-life-threatening situations. In the UK, just 2 weeks ago, the first ever robot surgery on a human cornea. Now that's precise surgery, ladies and gentlemen. It's the age of automation. There are many challenges with automation. 35% of jobs in the UK, according to a report given to the House of Lords last year, will have been automated in the next 20 years. Globally, we expect something like 240 million jobs to go the way of the dinosaur because of automation in that same period, 20 years. This, I suggest to you, is going to mean that business leaders, among others, will be called upon to set up, if not on their own, then in combination with each other, small mental health facilities. I'm not talking about psychiatric clinics. I'm talking about places where people can go to learn simple skills like cognitive behavioural therapy. I think churches should start doing this now. Don't wait 10, 15, 20 years. Cognitive behavioural therapy is just skills to help me deal with transition. In an age when transition will not be the norm, but be the exception, but the norm, because of automation. And then we have the generation revolution. A couple of years ago, a young woman in America forced 17 magazine to take away all photos that were photoshopped from their models on pages. She had 100,000 people respond to an online petition to that end. At the same time, some young men in Southern America put out an app to allow black young people to report what they see as police abuse in the wake of the death of Michael Brown. And around the same time, a young woman in Northern England came up with a no makeup selfie campaign. Some of you have heard of it, where women were putting photos of themselves, particularly celebrities, without makeup online to raise money for cancer research. In 1 week, this young 17-year-old raised 8 million British pounds for cancer research. This is the revolution in generation, the new generation aged under 19 through most of the developing and developed world. I call Generation Edge, some people call it Generation Z. It's a very low trust, big noise generation. It doesn't trust institutions. And it wants to make a big noise to change things, but the change for them will come mainly through the digital space. Our research, and much of the research that we constantly read on Generation Z or Generation Edge, says that they're much more pragmatic than the millennials, who are above them, aged 35 to 20. Much more pragmatic, much more wary of promises about the good life. Building trust with these young people as they come into your business will take a longer approach, a longer period of time. They have a self-reliant focus, they're ambitious, they're driven, but they expect opposition, which the millennials didn't quite, which is why they face a frustration today in finding the world they've inherited is not the world they were promised when they were children. They're a rebellious generation, but rebellion for reform is the key here. They don't see rebellion as a way of marking their territory or some sort of anarchistic end-in-itself type behaviour. If you go into schools today at senior high school level, you'll find a lot of these young people are talking about whistleblowers, because whistleblowers for them are the heroes in the story. They're rebelling for reform. And here's the interesting one for me, and these are important to you if you're in business today, because these are the guys that are going to drive the future of your strategy for the next 15 to 20 years. They're a much more conservative generation when it comes to ethics and social responsibility. Just last week, a study emerged in the United Kingdom supporting what I've been saying for some time, that this is a more conservative generation, less hedonistic in its behaviour. This report said that this generation is much less inclined to support things, relatively recent social movements like same-sex marriage or, gender rights and even abortion, I'm not making a statement on this, I'm just telling you what the study said, than millennials were before them. The rates of alcohol abuse and drug abuse in the UK have gone down markedly in the last 10 years, and the only explanation is generational change. These guys are more conservative in their ethics.